Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to start by welcoming everyone today to our presentation on the Birth Through 3 Toolkit. I'm Tracy Vogeltans. I work as a mediator and custody evaluator for Multnomah County Family Court Services. And the panel that's presenting the materials to you today is from the PIOS Subcommittee of the State FLAC, and PIOS is for Parental Involvement and Outreach Subcommittee. The committee's been working for the better part of 2 years on developing these materials that you're going to hear about today, so we're really excited to offer you an opportunity to see what we have been putting together. Because the subject of parenting time for children under 4 has been a critical issue that's met with a lot of debate over the years. And so what we are presenting is a set of tools that is not meant to be prescriptive, does not treat families as a one-size-fits-all, but rather gives some very important research and evidence-based factors that are important to consider for children in this age range. And these are things that are informed by things in brain development, neuroscience, and some of the most current research. So again, we just keep in mind that all families are unique, and again, this is not to be dictating what to do, but really a way to think about the information that families bring to us. But before we jump into the agenda, I want to introduce a panel that's going to be presenting with me today. It's really been my honor to work with this panel of exemplary professionals. Not all of the PIOS committee members are here today, but we have about half of us. And so they will all be presenting. Jane Parisi-Mosier is a licensed marriage and family therapist, mediator, and parent educator with a private practice in McMinnville. She's also been a longstanding member of the court panel in Yamhill County. And she has done specialized training in Australia with Jen McIntosh on child-inclusive and child-focused mediation. So welcome, Jane. Next to her, we have Linda Scher. Linda has maintained a private practice in Portland since 1990, offering mediation services on all aspects of family issues. She received her JD from the University of Washington and is an associate member of the Oregon State Bar Family Law Section. Linda was a member of the State Family Law Advisory Committee for 16 years and chaired its parenting plan work group. Next to Linda, we have Judith Swinney, JD. She's a cooperative adoption mediator with the Oregon Department of Human Services and a parenting coach in Portland, Oregon. She facilitates the widely attended and reviewed Parenting Beyond Conflict class in Portland and online, as well as providing supervised parenting time and reunification services. Judith is also a board member of the Oregon Association of Family and Conciliation Courts for the state of Oregon. Next to Judith, we have the Honorable Judge Sean Armstrong. Judge Armstrong recently joined the PIOS committee, bringing extensive family law experience as both an attorney and judge. Judge Armstrong spent 12 years in private practice in all aspects of family law, including custody, parenting time, and relocation issues before coming to the bench. He served as on the executive committee for the Oregon State Bar Family Law Section and is board member and president of the Marion County Bar Association. In 2007, he began volunteering as a circuit court judge pro tem, exclusively handling domestic relations cases. He was appointed to the Marion County bench by Governor Brown in February of 2016, and while he handles all matters that come to his courtroom, he's happiest when litigating and helping families resolve their family law issues through settlement conferences. He serves as head of the Marion County Family Law Advisory Committee. Last but not least, I'd like to extend this committee's appreciation to Hope Licks and Amy Church, who have supported the PIOS committee. They are the ladies who have been checking you in today, and Hope Licks regularly attends and supports the PIOS subcommittee and has spent an unquantifiable number of hours and patience in making this training happen today. So please join me in sharing your appreciation for these ladies' efforts. So just some logistics. The bathrooms, if you haven't already found them, are out the door and to the left. We're going to be taking a break. We're actually going to move that to 2:15, but feel free to get up, move about, and take care of yourself as needed. We will and be welcoming questions. We have some natural breaking points in the presentation when we'll kind of stop and ask for questions. This presentation is being recorded, so if you have a question, we're going to have a runner bring you a microphone so that when this recording is used for webinar trainings, those participants as well will have the benefit of hearing your questions. Let's see, I think I've covered all of our logistics. So at this point, we're going to have Judith and Linda give you some background on kind of the history of tools and services and how the PIOS group came to be and kind of the history in Oregon that's brought you this tool today.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Okay, so definition of birth through 3 that we're using for these materials. It is not chronological, but what we mean by birth through 3 means up to turning age 4. Also, though, of course, knowing children, some reach that developmental level sooner, some later. And so we're talking about the general span of time in which a child is working on these particular goals developmentally. So historically, there have been sort of 2 branches of research and advocacy for young children and parenting plans, and they've followed 2 tracks, essentially. There's the research that looks at infant attachment. This is the more developmental behavioralists, looking at what is protective factors that support good attachment, how attachment plays into early development and adult adjustment over time. And then there's another branch that follows the more social and legal impact of divorce and separation on children and how they adjust to changes in their family. And those have particularly also looked at what the presence of a father has meant to a family after separation and what benefits a child gains specifically from a relationship with the father after separation and divorce. Of course, there's many lingering questions. 2 of the key ones that we identify that still need some significant research to get more certainty about or more guidance is how does the change in this family, this divorce or separation, impact a developing attachment in a young child? How does that impact them as they move through that change in their family? And secondly, how can parents and professionals, people in this room, help balance the importance of the attachment with the importance of parental involvement in the child's life? So ongoing research is being done, and we still are looking for more information that shares insight in that area. So historical tension points between attachment theory and parental involvement research. In attachment theory, the focus has been historically that there's a primary attachment that you focus on, and then you look at other attachments that arise from that. In the parental involvement research, the thinking has been looking at for multiple attachments. They form concurrently, that the primary attachment isn't what you're looking for. You're looking to keep attachments where they are or where they're found. Another tension that you see in the literature is in attachment theory, the primary attachment is the overarching protective factor. It's the highest priority of preserving in a child. In parental involvement research, keeping both parents involved is the overarching protective factor for the child that the focus is on. Another tension is that along the same lines, you interfere with the primary attachment. That's more harmful than disrupting the parent relationship, and vice versa. And then finally, the shortfall for both of these theories is that the research has focused in the attachment theory side primarily on mothers and how they interact with children. And on the parental involvement research, it's focused primarily on fathers and how they interact and the importance of their role in children's lives. neither of which really tells the whole story. So this has been, as you can see, a more dichotomous binary approach. There's an either-or-ness to it. There's my time and your time as a parent and your time. There's I'm the custodial parent, you're the visiting parent. There's the male, the father has certain roles, the mother, the female has certain roles, and they're distinct and different. It's a very limiting kind of model to work off of in the families that we know and see today. So what's emerged has been a new paradigm, and that's one that's dynamic, it's fluid, it sees the child and the child's relationship as well as the parents and their relationship as a continuum. It's changing over time. It's got factors that can be developed, strengthened, and supported. There's an emerging new relationship in the shift in the family. There's the looking for how to provide the maximum safety for the child from all of the elements in their environment, how to make sure that there's responsive care from both parents with the child. And it's parent and parent, not necessarily a certain role as a mother or a father or a gender label. So this comes from a report that we'll talk about in a moment, but this is a quote from Marcia Klein Pruitt, Jennifer McIntosh, and Joan Kelly. Reliance on either attachment theory or joint parental involvement research, as if these are not overlapping and inextricably related, has fostered polarizations in both legal and academic thinking, and that impedes a thoughtful integration model. And that's what they and we were looking for in trying to provide another way to deal with issues that come up for young children. So this report that we just quoted from came from an AFCC, that's Association for Family and Conciliation Courts. It's an international organization. It's mostly based in the United States, but it's all over the world, their members and participation. They brought together a multidisciplinary group of different thinkers with different perspectives to try and see if they could come up with some consensus. And from that series of meetings, long series of meetings, they produced a report, and that was published by the AFCC in 2 articles, and those are on that website that you saw at the beginning. We'll pull that site up again at the end where all these other materials are, and you'll find that on the OJD website. So those articles is one set of materials that you can look to get more information. Another is the Birth Through 3 guide, which you would have received today, or if you already brought it with you, would have it and seen it, use it all the time possibly. It's a terrific guide, and we'll be talking about that throughout and what elements are there that are helpful to you. All of them are helpful, but what relate to what we're talking about. And then there's the Birth Through 3 Parenting Time tool that our subcommittee produced and the SFLAC, the State Family Law Advisory Committee, adopted. So those are some of the tools that we'll be integrating into our presentation today and helping you work with. And now I'm going to pass it to Tracy and Jane. Oh, that's okay. By the way, Hope Hicks, her name is Hicks, she's in the back there, and she's the one that we were celebrating for her contribution as a staff person to our committee, her invaluable contribution.
So Jane and I are going to present kind of some background on attachment, since that's kind of the basis for where a lot of these factors have come from. Oops. What did that end? Okay, there we go. Thank you. There we go. All right. So the word attachment gets thrown around a lot. We're going to kind of give some pretty specific definitions to it and distinguish attachment from a bond. So a child can have a bond with a caregiver, a parent, but it does not necessarily mean that they have an attachment. So lots of times as a mediator, when I'm mediating between parents of young children, I'll hear, well, you know, the child's always excited to see me and I can put the child down to bed and the child doesn't cry during the night. that's not necessarily an attachment. There might be attachment there, but it's not necessarily an attachment. A bond is more speaking to the emotional feelings of a child. Attachment doesn't necessarily correlate with, does the child love me? And sometimes for parents that gets confusing. When we're talking about the concept of attachment, we're using that word to describe the unique relationship between the child and his or her caregiver or caregivers. It is not something that you either get or you don't. You either have it or you have a poorly formed attachment or a disorganized attachment, which does not allow a child to make sense of their world. We're all born with the innate mechanism, if you will, the drive to form attachments. And children's behaviors are specifically designed to draw out those attachment behaviors in their parent. And they do that by seeking proximity to their caregiver, behaviors that seek out responses from a parent that say, I'm attuned to you, I get who you are, I know what your needs are, I delight in you, I find joy in you. It's those kinds of behaviors that communicate to a child that they understand and get to know who they are in this world. And children seek that out because it's a foundation then for many skills that they start developing as a child and carry with them through life as an adulthood. Some of the skills that helps them develop are their ability to explore the world. So first we have to know that we trust the world, that it's safe, that our caregivers have established that base of safety and security for us. It also helps us develop trust, self-awareness, the ability to have empathy for others, and to be successful in our relationships as adults. And Jane's going to talk specifically about some of those elements in more detail in a little bit. But the important thing to know is that really attachment is something that needs to be developed, and it's the outcome of whether it's a secure attachment versus an avoidant attachment versus a disorganized attachment versus an anxious attachment that we're really focusing on here. And this first period of life that we're talking about is incredibly critical. It's a window of opportunity when these attachments are formed. So before we get going more into the different elements of attachment, Jane's going to talk about how it differs from a bond.
So when a family comes to you, whether they're in your office or in front of you at the bench, you're going to be hearing a lot of different information about relationships, about what's going on, about the status of the situation. And the qualities of bonding are outlined in the strength of the adult's feeling of connection to the child. So that's something that you'll hear about to what degree or not that adult moves towards that child, feels that they want to be part of their life or is motivated. Caregiving in bonding is focused on completing the tasks of providing care for the child. And so you're going to be looking at the adult's ability to do that. Actually, can they do the care? Do they recognize the need for care and the systems of care? So it's very discrete tasks that can be laid out. The caregiver in bonding sets the pace for the interaction. They're the leader. They're in charge. They move forward. They set the routine. They set the structure. And what happens is you will see there are some places with bonding as differentiated from attachment that the child's response to the caregiver or to the parent is one where their distress may or may not be openly expressed in a spontaneous way. So that there is not a direct connection between the child's expressed distress level and the relationship of bonding. So if you're a grandparent and you have your little child with you, that you might be meeting all their needs, but in another way, we've all had this, those of us who are parents, who you go to work, you come home, you walk in the door to pick up your child, and within 3 minutes, the child has burst out into tears. They're in a puddle on the floor. And you were saying, everybody's saying, well, they were fine when you were gone. Believe me, this was not happening. They were not screaming for the last 7 hours. That happens for a reason. And it is related to relationship, and I'll talk a little more about that. Also, in the bonding situation, the relationship is goal-oriented. It's future-focused. The person in that relationship is looking kind of at that broader, longer term and providing structure. So when we talk about bonding, we're talking a lot about an adult experience, right? What's happening for the adult, and you'll hear that. When we talk about the qualities of attachment, we're talking about the child's experience and the child's capacity. Because in that continuum that we showed is you have the child that's over time, and you have each parent responding who that child is and what their needs are and what their availability to form attachment and over time changes, and it changes rapidly. And that's why this particular age range, birth through 3, we look at as a special time in the child's life. It's a place apart, and why it should not just be subsumed under other guidelines. Why we really are motivated to bring forth training so that people understand what makes this particular group distinct from the other groups. The qualities of the child's emotional connection to the caregiver. That's an aspect of attachment. And it is built by interaction, and it's built by receptivity. So you can have great motivation, but the child also brings to this relationship. Caregiving is focused on meeting the expressed needs of the child. So it's not the big picture of your philosophy about child raising. Right? This is not about your philosophy. It's boots on the ground. It's moment to moment. And we call this attunement. What is being expressed and how are you responding? And it's physical, very physical, as well as emotional. And it involves emotional availability and also involves emotional management. The child initiates the interaction and the adult responds. So it's again differentiated from bonding, because this is the place where you might be watching, where you might be listening to the child, and then you are using their cues and their behavior to formulate your response, rather than you having the response and then dictating it to the child. The child freely expresses distress and openly without reservation. So the quality of the child's experience is what they feel is what you get. So it just comes out of them in a very undefended way. And in order for that to happen, you have a sense of safety that the child feels. And this is something, we're talking about things that are somewhat intuitive, depending on the age of the child, but we're also talking about something that is involved with nuance. And the child has no language. The concepts of language are really not there. For the first year of life, language is something that is not part of their expressive experience. It's physically expressed, and so you have to be interpreting. And so how you respond also defines the response. The child, again, has no sense of time, so the relationship is interpersonally oriented and present focused. It's all about now and how you respond. So the future, present, the past, and the future as we know it has no meaning for very young children and for infants. So you're operating in the now. So a simple example of this would be if you had someone who was with a child, maybe the first 6 or 8 months of their life, And there were older siblings, maybe 4 and 6-year-olds, and then that parent went away for 12 months. When they came back into the child's life, in aspects of bonding, they may feel very bonded. They also may feel very competent and capable because they're an experienced parent. And they know how to approach, they know how to diaper, they know how to do. But at that point, the child that they left is not the child they're returning to. And that relationship is not built on a step-by-step basis. It doesn't mean a relationship cannot exist, but it means that it has to be responded to in the present and built. And that's why that continuum allows parents to flow in where they are at. And each parent is forming their own relationship with the child on an ongoing basis, actually throughout all of childhood.
So how do we get attachment? Attachment is something that's created. We understand that it starts to develop in the last trimester of pregnancy and continues through the third year of life, which is again is why we're really focused on this critical window of development. It also coincides with the greatest period of brain volume development in a child's life. So in the first 2 years of life, the child's brain is going to grow in volume more than it will at any other time in a human's history. During that time, what's going on with brain development is we're laying down lots of neural pathways. So these are all the messaging centers that get set up that take stimulus in from the outside world, where we sort it out, decide what it means, and how we're going to respond to it. Well, brain development is shaped primarily by two things: genetics and our experience in the environment. What gets developed out genetically, genetics may not present at all. So I might have a genetic predisposition towards depression. But if my environment doesn't necessarily play into that, for that gene to be expressed, I may carry the gene, but it may never be expressed. I might have a gene for anxiety. And if I live in an environment where I learn to be anxious, that gene is more likely to be expressed. So we're looking at how the interplay of genetics and the environment is going to determine how this child develops healthy brain functioning all the way through adulthood. What we know about the last trimester of pregnancy is that a child's hearing begins to develop about the 5th month. So the child can now hear, and in particular, can resonate and attune to the mother's voice, not only because of what they're hearing, but because of the vibration of the vocal cords. So there's actually studies that show us at 7-8 months of pregnancy, they can monitor fetus's heart rate and see changes in the heart rate in response to the mother's voice. So an infant's heart rate will actually go down and be calmed by a mother's voice. They don't yet have a lot of really data or definitive answers on how child responds to father's voice. That hasn't been as clearly illuminated, but there's definite research that shows us that fetuses are responding to the mother's voice and recognize that voice upon birth. And then within a few weeks of birth, we know that infants recognize both parents' faces. Attachment is created through basically a dance of the brains. It's my right brain, which responds to stimulus and is the emotional center where those kinds of capacities are, to my child's right brain, which is the first part of the brain to come online of the two hemispheres at birth. So it's my right brain communicating with my child's right brain. And it's largely nonverbal, so it's much less the words we say, and it's our touch, it's our tone of voice, it's our facial expressions that communicate to the child that, again, that I get them, that I recognize them, that they are important, that it is safe to be here. And it's done through, many of you have kind of heard the term, these mirror neurons. And what that says is the child gets a reflection of themselves through me. So if my child is delighting and excited about something, and I mirror that back to them. So if they're, moving about and giving us that, jawbreaker smile and they're happy, and as a parent you reflect that back and you're smiling and engaging in a similar tone, then they get that we feel them, that they know what we're experiencing. So they're using us as a mirror to what their feelings are. And if we don't get it right, then it sets up a foundation for really not being able to make sense of the world in an accurate way. The parent's capacity to be able to attune to their child in that way depends heavily on experiences they had in their own childhood. And there's some practitioners who will administer an adult attachment inventory. Perhaps you've heard of that, which basically tells a therapist, what kind of attachment relationship did you have growing up? And they can actually predict with about 80% accuracy, based on the attachment relationship I had growing up. They know what my attachment relationship is going to be like with my own children. And these things are influenced by trauma, domestic violence, substance abuse. If I, as a parent, have not resolved my own traumas, I'm really not present for my child to provide that attuned, responsive care. Because really what I'm doing is I'm still living in my world of trauma every day as if it's happening every day in the present moment, even though it might have been 10, 20, 30 years ago, which makes me unavailable to attune to my child. Research tells us that attachment comes and is formed at different times with different caregivers. So within the first 7 to 8 months of life, we know that children can form multiple attachment. But at times, they seek out caregivers for specific kinds of needs that they have an attachment relationship with. So during the first 18 months of life, my infant will seek me out for particular needs to be met based on our attachment relationship, and may seek out father or the other parent for other kinds of attachment needs based on their attachment relationship. So again, this kind of comes back to then when we're crafting parenting plans, recognizing what is the unique attachment relationship for each parent with that infant and being able to capitalize on those strengths and maintain those through our parenting time arrangements. Oh, thank you, you've already advanced that. So as we mentioned before, this is the attachment system lays a foundation for future adult functioning. Jane's going to talk a lot more about emotional regulation, and basically that's our ability that we develop over time to take care of our emotional needs. And it's more than just soothing a child when they're distressed, which would be considered like a negative emotional state, but also helping a child to manage up states or positive states. So when they become overstimulated, how do we appropriately kind of get them down to baseline so they're not always in an overstimulated state? And these build our capacities to relate to other people later on. It develops our capacities for empathy, which is our ability as adults to use our own mirror neurons to read other people accurately. If we haven't been read accurately, we don't have the capacity to read other human beings accurately. Because what happens is the frontal part of the brain, you've probably all been to lots of brain trainings, that tells us the prefrontal cortex is the executive functioning part of the brain. Well, that can only develop in a healthy way if the more primitive parts of the brain that come online earlier have developed in a healthy way. Well, if I'm experiencing trauma, if I'm exposed to violence, if I'm not having my needs met, if I have a disrupted attachment, what happens is when I'm laying down all those neural pathways as a child, my focus of my energies is back in the more primitive parts of the brain that are fight, flight, or response centers. So rather than kind of giving that energy, if you will, the nutrients to the developing prefrontal cortex, I really stay stuck back in the primitive brain, and my responses to the world really come from the fight, flight, or freeze areas which have become ingrained. So those pathways of the brain, which we use more often, get really hardwired in and glued down, and they're kind of like automatic for us. Those parts of the brain that we might develop for more executive functioning, if we're not using those during periods of maturation, some of those brain areas wither away. It's kind of like the concept of using a muscle. If you use it or you lose it. So we want to make sure that we're feeding and nurturing those more advanced executive brain capacities and development through healthy interactions. Okay, so Jane's going to talk about the emotional regulation piece and why that's important.
Well, Tracy has covered a lot of really important brain information, and so what I'm going to do is really kind of draw some of the pieces and points out to give you some highlights and as we move ahead. So emotional regulation is the ability to identify and manage and recover from strong feelings. That's the definition of it. When we talk a lot about it, it's something that we learn early in life and that we continue to develop throughout our lifespan. And really, what we're talking about in birth through 3 is emotional co-regulation. The infant and young child does not have the ability to regulate their own emotion. So they say there's no such thing as an infant. There's always an infant and someone. And the and is the relationship. Not only do they need relationship to survive, but the relationship develops and shapes their physical response, their emotional response, and their ability to learn how to manage what's happening within them. Repeated experience of emotional co-regulation allow a child to understand and accept his feelings and use healthy ways. So the child doesn't tumble down into distress and kind of a meltdown. And sometimes even to keep going, you'll watch a child, they'll move and you'll see them and they'll try to hold on to it really, really hard. You'll see their little face turn into a cloud, and then you'll see them bring it back, and that's the actual physical representation of emotional regulation. As Tracy said, chronic unresolved emotional dysregulation expose the child and their brain to damaging stress hormones in critical developmental periods. This is not a psychological experience only, it is a physiological experience. So the actual sense of distress and feeling as if you are hurting, feeling as if you are going to die, children experience the world with their body first. So if a baby is distressed, that's a physical experience for that baby. So as Tracy said, it's part of emotional healthy brain development, and it's based on attunement and what the parent brings to the process, mirroring, modeling, naming, and soothing. The next aspect of attachment, wrapping up, it's a process. It's not a state. And what will happen, that it's ongoing and it's built and it is unique to each individual. It is not generalized. It does not happen automatically, and that's a very important thing. It isn't something that pops up like the way their teeth pop up at a certain time. It develops and changes over the lifespan, and we have attachment relationships as we get older. We get to reshape and reform and choose. And attachment can be strengthened and reinforced through responsive care. It's not a one-time through, and if you miss it, then that's the end. Attachment security is attachment resiliency, and it forms the base for future attachments. It allows a repair after a breach or a disruption. And so by having many small repairs in a very safe attachment, the child learns things will come back, it's okay. So as a parent, it's not hit or miss. You actually can repair, and repair is huge. It's as important as getting it right, because healthy parents only get it right about 33% of the time. The other 2/3 of the time, it's repair. I missed it. I'm going to hang with you till we find the right thing. and it increases the child's adapted capacities and future attitudes and experiences of stress.
So we're just going to kind of sum up the attachment presentation by really just, if there's one thing you take away, it's kind of just the model that attachment is the foundation for an emotionally regulated infant who's able to show empathy and have, healthy adult brain development, which leads to healthy adult functioning. And so, without that is where we see children, have ongoing mental health issues, social issues, a lot of externalizing behaviors that follow them through life, and an inability to form their own healthy social relationships if it's not done right or repaired.
So again, we'll look at attachment and supporting attachment to both parents. What does all this mean? The key to building and maintaining attachment is to focus on the child's experience and needs as opposed to the parent's desire for fairness. If you stay with your child in the present and you are attuned, that will be your guide for your child's health and for your responsiveness and for the building of a secure relationship with both parents. So attachment is encouraged by providing responsive care. That's a can-do situation. Feeding, comforting, sleeping, napping, building tolerance for change. The next thing is reduce parental anxiety. Not only the primary residential parent, but the receiving parent. So one of the feelings that the child gets of, are you there and can you take care of me? What does it feel like in that secure attachment? And that's built by that responsive care. In its alignment and mutual support between the parents, where parents teach each other. This works. Let me show you how. Yesterday I did this. That's part of it. And creating opportunities to build attachment without chronically distressing the child. So it's a fine balance there of moving forward and also keeping your finger on the pulse of the needs of this child.
Okay, and I don't have to tell all of you who work with families that families are changing. I think we just want to acknowledge that, to do good work with families today, we have to move away from this dichotomous binary model that children grow up in homes with a mom and a dad, and that we have all sorts of constellations of what makes up family, and that the tool that we're going to present to you shortly works with families of all constellations and doesn't, depend on this historic binary model. So at this point, we are going to spend just a little bit of time on the particular issue of children's exposure to domestic violence, and I'm going to invite Judge Armstrong up because he's going to be sharing his insights from the bench with us as well. Yeah, is there any questions that we can address at this point? Okay, so, and then after we finish on the domestic violence piece, we'll be taking a break, and the whole panel will be here throughout the afternoon for questions. Domestic violence is a particularly important consideration that we'll be talking about when we go through the factors because of the impact it can have on the developing brain. And what we know is that children under 6 are at particularly high risk for exposure to domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And here we're kind of using those terms interchangeably. UNICEF estimates that worldwide there's probably 275 million children who are exposed to domestic violence in the home. Here in the United States, the numbers are all over the map. You'll hear 5 million, 10 million, 15 million. Regardless of whose research or data is, it's a lot. And those are likely only representing the millions of children where it's been reported and doesn't even begin to account for the cases where exposure has not been reported. It is not uncommon at all for domestic violence to occur during pregnancy. This puts the developing fetus and infant at risk for premature labor, low birth weight, and other sorts of developmental setbacks because of the violence. And we know that domestic violence, when you're working with separating and divorcing families, that is the period of greatest risk for violence to occur. And typically the closer the family becomes over the history of the couple's relationship together, the more severe the violence and the coercive control becomes. So during the dating period, you'll often hear these clients who thought they, had met the person of their dreams, there was nobody like them, they were attentive, they were kind, they were loving, but with each step that binds them closer together, moving in together, marriage, forming a family, we'll kind of see that those hooks become more prevalent with a perpetrator and kind of dig in deeper. We know that exposure as a child to domestic violence is correlated with those children then experiencing being either a victim or a perpetrator of domestic violence through the lifespan at triple the rates of children who are not. Specifically with some of with the age group we're talking about, here are some of the particular reactions we might see. So sleeping and eating disruptions. We'll often see children who are wakeful throughout the night or refusing food. They may appear glazed over and unresponsive to us. Lots of inconsolable crying, separation anxiety, kind of clinging on to a parent and not letting go. We will see children with failure to thrive syndrome. We have children who will be delayed in reaching developmental milestones such as walking and speaking, or they may regress in skills that they have already mastered, for example, toileting skills. We'll see more acting out behaviors. These are children, when I'm getting reports from school, these are the kids who are being the bullies. These are the kids who are kicking, biting, being defiant with their peers. Because this disrupts attachment to be exposed to domestic violence in many ways, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I'll ask if you've got any perspectives from the bench or cases where you've seen how this kind of plays out.
Sure, and I think maybe two ways to look at this. The first thing is, I see a few of my colleagues in the room and plenty of attorneys. I think we're all used to reading trial memoranda and hearing trial testimony in which one party vilifies the other party. And most of the time, that's not very helpful to me as a judge, because I expect people to disagree about things and have communication issues. This process should give you some insight into some things to look out for, and a good example is the toileting difficulties. Usually that's presented to me as this parent doesn't know how to potty train this child. But when you hear that an issue is that one parent has succeeded and one parent is having difficulties, that is a key to consider the possibility of intimate partner violence. So you should think about it differently than just pass it off as this is one parent vilifying another and I can disregard that and kind of ignore that testimony. So I'll stop there for now.
Okay. I think I might have backed over a slide. Okay. So we know that children at young ages who are exposed, they're at increased risk for becoming direct victims of child abuse, whether they're caught in the crossfire of physical altercations between the parents. We know that there's a 35 to 70% of male perpetrators of domestic violence also abuse their children. We know they're at risk for poor school performance. Again, this inability then to focus because they've experienced a trauma. Children actually suffer more from witnessing a parent being abused than if you had directly and physically abused the child. And these are things that they don't get out of their head. I mean, they're making memories of this. And so oftentimes I'll talk to parents and I'm like, oh yeah. In fact, some parents brought in a letter just recently from a child who had written to both of them saying how much she just hated their arguing and she couldn't wait to get away and leave for college. And mom's going, yeah, she's talking about that argument we had, and the dad's going, yeah, I don't even remember that. And it's like, well, of course you don't, because to you it wasn't that intense and it was probably just one more argument and these things like, you have different understanding of them. But to this child, she probably plays that tape over and over and over in her head again and again. So children then, who have been exposed, we'll see them with higher rates of mental health issues presenting. Depressions, anxiety, signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, behavioral problems in school, as I've mentioned. I'm dealing with a family right now where I'm pretty convinced that the children have been exposed to a lot of domestic violence with mothers, other partners. But at school, what I'm hearing is they can't focus. This child can't focus for more than 10 minutes. They're behind in their reading skills. They're like a whole grade level behind. And these children can often be inaccurately diagnosed with things like ADHD when it's actually a trauma response. So these are some of the reasons it's really important to suss out what's going on and to do appropriate screening. So these are just some of the references that we've used for the statistics I've presented. And Judge Armstrong's going to talk a little bit more about the differences between a coercive relationship and a more healthy relationship.
Okay. And just to give an example of something that Jane mentioned, I had a 17-year-old child testify in my courtroom maybe 3 or 4 months ago. Her parents were fighting over custody of her, and they were fighting over custody of the 15-year-old child. The 15-year-old child had run away from home and refused to come home to either parent because he said that if dad gets custody, I'll go live with him, but I can't live with mom. The parents couldn't work out any part of that, and so they both wanted their 17-year-old daughter to explain to me why the other parent was a terrible parent and what was really going on. And what the 17-year-old child said to me on the stand in front of her parents was, all my parents have ever done for my entire life is fight with each other about who got to parent me like I was a piece of property. I can't wait to turn 18. I will move out of their houses, and I will never see either of them ever again. So, just a little insight into what happens when parents are dysfunctional and have trouble getting along. I'm going to try to operate this as best I can, but bear with me. So I'm going to talk about the coercive worldview and the collaborative worldview of parenting. And it goes to sort of this concept. Who here has heard somebody say something along these lines? Yes, he is abusive to me, but he's a good dad, so I want him to spend lots of time with the kids. Show of hands? Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. The coercive worldview is the worldview of somebody who engages in intimate partner violence. The collaborative worldview is the healthier worldview of someone who has some emotional maturity and recognizes that the world doesn't revolve around them, but that we're sort of all in this together. So, I did it. The coercive worldview. I am entitled to more respect than others. From a judge's perspective, I'm here for you to please me, so you will present the arguments I want to hear in court and nothing else, or I will cut you off. From the playground, if I don't get to be quarterback, then I'm going to go home. That's a lot different than, and I'll use my job as an example, others are entitled to equal respect. Attorneys, thank you for coming before me today. How are we going to work to collaboratively bring justice or a positive result to this family that we're addressing today? My needs are important than others. I absolutely have a tea time at 2 o'clock, and if your case isn't wrapped up by then I'm leaving. Okay? That's a lot different than you've got a client you have to manage, you have a client you have to manage, I have certain evidence I want to hear, I know that there are certain things that you probably want to tell me on behalf of your client that's important to them that maybe isn't going to factor in my decision making, and I respect your need to present that. So we're all going to get to do that part of our job that's important to our clients. This one I use all the time on the bench. I try to get what I want and need through violence or threats. But in seriousness, and I'll pick on my own profession for example, we've all had somebody say something like, you aren't going to present that argument, and if you try to bring it up at court, I'm going to make you pay the other side's attorney's fees, or something like that. And I'm using my job as an example because it's a little funnier than domestic violence. So, and then the collaborative review, I negotiate and problem solve to try and get what I need. This is really sort of the fundamental way that we get through the world almost all the time, if you think about it. And now's a good time to ask this question. Has anybody in this room ever had a coworker, employee, supervisor, client, opposing counsel, or judge that operates from the coercive worldview? Okay. Can anybody try and just remember what it feels like to have to deal with that person just for a minute? Can anybody remember the apprehension of saying, oh my God, I got to call this lawyer and I know I'm going to get yelled at, right? Or, oh my God, I got to go in and see if I can get my boss to give me a day off, but I know that there's a reason I can't do it. I don't know what it is yet. I know he'll think of one. I know I get to hear all about my failures as an employee, so I just don't want to do it. That's how we're fully formed adults. That's how we feel about that. Imagine how a child feels in that environment. There is one right way to solve a problem my way. So I'm guilty of this one. I actually had a conversation with my wife this morning in which she said, and I'm quoting here, "You are in your my way or the highway mode. Why don't you take some time to reflect on what you just said and talk to me when you can be a little more objective about it?" So she had her apology by about 10 this morning. And then a much better approach. I've got things that I want to see come out of a situation. You've got things that you want to see come out of a situation. How do we try and work to get to some sort of result that we can both live with? Okay, or from a mediator standpoint, how do we both get equally dissatisfied with the results so we can settle our case and get on with our lives? And then let me apply this directly to what we're talking about. A lot of what I see from the bench in the coercive worldview, and I'll give you a couple examples. Children are an extension of the parent. Their needs mirror mine and are otherwise less important. So who's been in a situation where a parent says something along the lines of, look, I need most of the time with my son because he is going to play football and only I can coach him to be the quarterback. Anybody? Or a version of that, right? Or I need to have all the parenting time because my wife had an affair and my child should never be raised by a person who's morally bankrupt. Okay, it's one of my favorites, right? Or I can't wait until this case is over so I can sit down and explain to my child how horrible their father really is, right? Okay, that's a lot different than children are unique individuals. Their needs are separate from mine and of equal importance. So let me give a couple, I'm trying to think of how to put this. So here's how I think of the distinction between these two things, and I hope you guys have a similar view about this. You often in a divorce or custody or parenting time case have the parent who gets it and the parent who doesn't get it, right? Does everybody kind of agree with that analysis, right? You're talking to your client, and your client says, look, here's the thing. I don't like that my wife left me for another woman. That is so personally upsetting to me that I will do whatever it takes for me to destroy her and have custody, right? Coercive worldview. I have to have it exactly my way, and I'll do what it takes to get it. Collaborative worldview. Our relationship didn't work out the way I wanted, but that's really kind of my problem and my wife's problem, or my problem and my husband's problem. How do we now figure out how to come together and parent our children? So the collaborative worldview, you get it, right? The coercive worldview, you don't. Now the next one, and I'm going to give you a couple examples of this, but that leads us to this concept, the principles of domestic violence screening. The first thing is you're here, get appropriate training. Hopefully this is beneficial to you all. Screen everyone and screen often. It's not enough to sort of go with your gut and think you know what you're hearing. I gave the example of toileting earlier. There are enough tools out there to figure out if what you're listening to is intimate partner violence or something else, that you should be able to apply those tools and get some insight, okay? There's plenty of experts to consult with, so you should do that whenever you can. Jackie Campbell is a PhD and a nurse at Johns Hopkins, and she did something called the Jackie Campbell Danger Assessment. And anybody here, I do restraining order hearings every once in a while. Any of the other judges in the room do those? Okay. Does anybody ever sort of have a checklist in mind about the things that they're the most worried about when they hear one of those, whether it's from a client or from an attorney or from a party or anything like that? For me personally, the presence of a weapon and some sort of a threat with the weapon is kind of a trigger for me, right? I'm going to go out and figure out how to operate a gun and come back is a lot different than I'm going to go get my pistol out and you're never going to see your new boyfriend again. So I think we have to be really attuned to these things. I printed out and have a copy if anybody wants the actual Jackie Campbell Danger Assessment. It's pretty interesting. And then this includes not just what we think of as, and pardon me for using this expression, but the traditional concept of domestic violence is a woman who has been physically assaulted by a spouse and has called the police. That's sort of the concept. That is a tiny, tiny fraction of what intimate partner violence really is. So emotional, verbal, economic, sexual, and physical. So I'm going to give a couple examples of these. Oh, okay. Well, then I will give a couple examples of these. I will, we're going to talk a little later, and I'll answer some questions if anybody has anybody. So who's up next? Oh, we'll take a break.
Okay.
Everybody take a break.
So before we take the break, we're going to come back, we're going to do a large group, we're going to introduce the tool, and that'll be passed out during the break. And we're going to do a large group example, and then we're going to go a small group example. It'll save us some time because we are running well behind. If you're in a 1 or 2 person table, if you could move to a 3-person table and join them so that when we do the small group, we'll have enough people to do the exercise. That would save us some time. We'd appreciate it. We're also going to just take a 10-minute break instead of 15 minutes, so we're going to come back at 1:45 at 2:45. Thank you.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the tool itself. As you see, the issues are what's safe? Is safety an issue in this family situation before us? What's the attachment like presently? How can we support it and build attachment if it's not there? What kind of contact is going to be appropriate based on the answers to these questions? And what about overnights, which, as we know, is the debate that rages? As Tracy mentioned, this is a fluid and dynamic process. We're looking at what's going on with the family now, but not stopping there. We're saying what's needed, what's known, and what's not known, and where do we go from there? Ding. So the matrix for this overnight before you, in a nutshell, encompasses these 8 factors. First of all, what we call the gateway factors: safety and trust and security. I'm not going to read them all to you word for word, but you can see we've got the gateway factors, following by these many key factors, and finally some other considerations involving the family as a whole. It's small print up here, but you've got it in front of you. Thank you.
I just want to add that it is a priority list, and it's numbered for a good reason. Number 1 is number 1. So when you go through it, we'll be talking about a systematic and orderly way to analyze the case.
I like the fact that it's color-coded as well. The first ones, of course, the safety, are in red. We've got the red, the yellow, and the green. I think that helps when we're sorting out the factors. These are things to think about, of course, when we're looking at overnights. Take a look. Is there an existing relationship of at least 6 months? Are we all safe, children and parents? If there's conflict, we look at the frequency and intensity. Not just is there conflict, but those 2 factors. How long is it going on? How often does it happen? Do we need plans to increase capacity to develop the attachments? And how do we do that? What kind of plans do we put in place so that there's opportunities to build skills, especially with a parent and a very young child? And then there are signs of distress, but then beyond that, there are problems that may be prolonged, behaviors that are going on and on, that get in the way of a child's ability to function. We look at those as well.
So you should have gotten a Birth Through 3 guide when you first came in and checked in. There is on page 21 of that guide a nice chart that shows you what are normal adjustment symptoms for a child of this age, and what are, or of any age, and what are signs of distress to look for and be concerned about. So that's a great resource for you. Oops. Okay. So just a couple of caveats. This is based on McIntosh, Pruitt, and Kelly's report. Their conclusion is that even when all parenting conditions are met, meaning all of the qualities that we have in the checklist are green light, go. Higher frequency of overnights, which they defined as more than 1 per week, are not generally indicated for infants 0 to 18 months. We don't 100% take this on as a rigid standard, and you'll see as we do the scenarios that there's variations there, but that's their conclusion. If you're uncertain about the outcome for a child, do the least harm, take a conservative approach, meaning take it slow. The conservative approach isn't just go 50-50 because that's what's fair, but think about continuing what's already in place, supporting what are the factors we'll be talking about that are working for the child, and growing from there. Generally also, of course, defer to parental discretion. If parents have a plan and it's working, that's a pretty good sign that that's going to be a family that's functioning as long as the child is doing well, and we're looking for that as well. Okay, so the different factors which we're going to be going through, the analysis we're asking you to consider is for each factor, is it present? I'm going to start from the bottom, the green. Is it present, meaning this is going well for this family, for both parents, for each parent, you're analyzing it. Let's make sure that continues. What can we do to shore it up? What can we do to build something that's going to keep it in place? If it's just emerging just now, then how do we support it, give more skills, give more structure that supports that factor growing into a present factor for each parent? This is also an opportunity. We talked earlier about trying to reduce anxiety for both parents. So if it's just emerging, that other parents probably pretty anxious about it, and they're going to want to see in a parenting plan some specific provisions that support that. And then, is it absent? That's the red. Is it a skill that isn't present or not being served for the child by the parent? If so, how do we try to structure for safety, but also then try and build some capacity and some skills? We're going to go through each one of these factors with the scenario one that you received, the Christian and Mandy scenario, and the tools that we're using besides the Birth Through 3 parenting time tool is this guide. When you do the small groups, you'll be able to take a look at that. But hopefully you've already read scenario one, Christian and Mandy. If not, take just a minute to do that, and then we'll start talking about each factor based on this particular scenario. Thanks. Okay. Oh, yeah, you do the first one. We'll give them another minute. I think your right foot here is good. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, pull them off as we go through. Sure. All right, let's proceed.
Okay. Looking at scenario one, in considering these gateway factors, look at A and B. In the scenario, do you have a concern about this child's safety in the care of either parent? And again, what's nice about this is you get to look at each parent or caregiver and be able to look at it side by side. What do you think? Jane's, our scribe here, is going to put down your answers.
Another answer could be we don't have enough information. And if the answer is we don't have enough information, think about what additional questions would we ask. If you're a judge, if you're an attorney, if you're a mediator, if you're an evaluator, if it just isn't present, isn't available to you, think about what questions would I ask to try and determine that factor.
So looking at scenario 1, do you have concerns about A or B, these gateway factors? Please.
I wouldn't have concern about mom. I would have to say, I don't have enough information about that.
Do we have a microphone?
Yes, there's supposed to be,
Yo.
I think Hope is going to.
So let's define A or B as which parent.
Hang on, hold that thought.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. Terry, Tracy.
Lisa, you get to pick who is going to be A and who's going to be B, which parent?
Let's make Christian A.
Okay.
Do we have sound?
I'm not sure. Doesn't sound like it to me. Turn on.
It's a recording microphone, I think. Right.
I said,
There we go.
the child is probably safe with mom. Is that a safe assumption? Probably there's never a safe assumption.
Well, you're not getting information that tells you that there's a safety concern about mom. We could say that.
Right, well, I don't, and I would want more information about that, but as far as things, as far as what we do know, I wouldn't think so.
Okay.
How about the parent's safety? B. Okay.
Yeah.
How about consideration 2? This child's trust and security. What do you think, Lynn?
Well, I'm just going to explain, at the same time, we're introducing you to these factors, so let me explain it. If you notice, there's a note there that if it is present, if it is absent for a parent in consideration 1 or consideration 2, we're talking about limited supervised time, and not going through the rest of this analysis, because the rest of this assumes there's safety present. Okay, so it kicks it out of the system for those considerations. So consideration 2 is the child's own trust and security. This kind of gets to the heart of the attachment core for that child. Does the child have a continuing and established relationship with the parent? And we have defined that as 6 months or more as a target. Does the child seek comfort from, and can the child be soothed by each parent? And is the child supported in exploration? Again, we might not have information. The answer might be, we need more information, but the core question is this child feeling emotionally safe in that parent's care? Any thoughts about this particular scenario? Claudia?
I don't think Alex is comfortable yet because he's getting handled by the mother's mother, grandma. But I also noticed that Christian's mother is willing to help take care of the baby in her home. So there's the question about drugs also. So you would want to ask them to possibly do a probation period, but don't use that word. On
So
whether.
hold the thought on the drug concern, but yes, so depending on when the child's in father's home, is the child going to be primarily in the care of father or also grandmother? And if equally or as much a caretaker as the grandmother, we want to know, is the child feeling safe with that
Right.
parent figure also?
Right, it seems like a transition period has to happen. The child trusts and gets attached to the father, and then once that's established, the trust is there for the child to go home with father, for grandmother to bond, and then attach, hopefully. So it takes time and transitions and a plan, an organized parent plan to help them achieve their long-range goals.
Right, that's a perfect example of how this tool gives you some information about what's the next step, where do you start, where do you grow it. Okay.
Again, this tool, what I like is it also can reveal what you don't know. And really define that, the unknown that you want to seek out answers to. For example, how much care is mother's mother giving the child? No problems were related, but when we're talking about attachment, mom's going back to school and working, these are teen parents, both grandparents are going to be instrumental and critical in this scenario. So the parent's capacity, what are their skill sets? Can they respond to this kiddo? Are there any chemical dependency problems? If it's present, then there's not a problem. What about dad in this scenario? That's an issue that's been raised, right? With Alex.
You feel like you have enough information for dad? No, yeah. There's old rumors, that's what you know.
Right. Mom says dad used drugs, pot, and mostly we don't know about now. And we don't know about mom's use. Nothing's mentioned, but they were hanging out together, right? How about mental health issues? Are any of those a problem for either parent based on this scenario?
Well, I just wanted to go back a minute for the drug issues, just because, they're a minor, so I guess it's a non-issue at this point, but, now that marijuana is legalized and with the medical cards, so legally it's similar to alcohol, I guess, even if there was active pot use, if they were over 21. I find that to be a difficult issue to see at what point does it become a parenting issue?
Well, they're both, like you said, they're both minors, so.
Yeah, in this scenario.
Even if they weren't, same thing with pills, alcohol, or weed, is it to the point of impairment, right? That's going to be the issue.
Right. And can they take proper precautions about keeping the child that young from being poisoned by ingesting it too? That's a pretty significant concern if there's those things are present. I will also say, note that well-managed could be present. If a person has mental health issues and it's being managed, it doesn't exclude them from having time with their child. The question is, how do you maintain that well-managed situation with an addiction or a mental health issue? What needs to be in the parenting plan and in the expectations that you feel like it's going to continue to be well-managed? And what's a contingency plan if they fall off? They stop taking medication, those kinds of things. Okay, the next one is the child's own health and development. So does the child have significant medical or developmental needs? And if they do, are they well supported by both parents? Do they understand them? Do they have the resources, the access to the things the child needs to meet those special needs? Second factor is the infant exclusively dependent on breastfeeding? It doesn't mean if you say that's present that there's no time with the other parent. What it means is you have to address that in your parenting plan. It doesn't tell you that knocks someone out of the running. It means that that's a plan that has to address that and make sure that important nutritional bonding developmental act is supported. So in this scenario, Christian and Mandy, do you see either of those factors come up? Anybody have a comment or thought? Okay.
Baby's able to take a bottle from grandma, right?
Good point.
So not exclusive.
Right. It does address that the child can have their nutritional needs met and is not going to feel an emotional, well, it doesn't say whether the child's still breastfeeding, does it? No. So but we do know that the nutritional part can be met. Thank you.
Quick comment.
Yeah.
And again, if you've got a child with a special needs or a medical issue, 4A, I think, is critically important. Once again, maybe you've got a parent who says, he doesn't know how to take care of the special needs child. He doesn't understand the issues of autism or a feeding problem. My question is, has that other parent been apprised? Does that other parent have the medical reports? Has had a chance to talk to the evaluators? If the answer is no, let's make sure both parents have this information. How can you meet a child's needs if you don't know what they are? So again, you may be saying, as a professional in this case, we need to get information to both parents so both parents can do a good job, especially when it comes to care and healthcare issues. Ding. Okay, look at consideration 5, please. This kiddo's adjustment. Are there signs, are there problems, persistent problems with parent A or parent B? Do you see that in this scenario? Any signs of that? And you might not, but again, that's what's nice about the checklist. It gives you a framework within which to work, and every family is going to be different. But this checklist can be used in each family you've got. You can check off what is an issue and what isn't.
There's a small hint. It does say that the first stretch of parenting time with Christian went well. So that gives you a clue. But we need more information. Next factor. This is one you all know about and have noticed and collected information on, I expect. How are the parents getting on together? Are they able to communicate and plan together? Do they manage conflicts, seek intervention when needed? Are they consistent but responsive with schedules? Do they value the child's relationship with the other parent? Do they put the child's needs before their own? That was an example of the coercive versus collaborative perspective. Can they ensure that there's low stress during transitions? Do you see any of that in this scenario that makes you think this is something we should pay attention to?
His mother hates me. There's a perfect recipe for problems.
Right.
I would say along with that, the fact that she's not responding to text messages and the mother is not responding to text messages or phone calls. She doesn't seem like she's reaching out to dad. But then also dad's inability to reach out to mom, he just kind of gives up after 6 weeks. It seems like neither parent is capable of, communicating and co-parenting.
Right, so that seems absent. What might you do with this parenting plan to try to draw it into emerging and eventually present? How might you address that? Looking at that factor, saying these parents don't have that, what might you do? Claudia over here, and Judge.
It was suggested to send them to a co-parenting class, and what I like to do is have weekly check-in meetings with the parents, like Sunday night, a phone call. How's it going? Oh, he's sick. I'm going to keep him one night more because he has a fever. Or I don't like your new girlfriend. She treats our boy bad. So the once a week check-in, and to find agreement and be on the same page with the discipline, the nutrition, the social activities, et cetera, et cetera. Co-parenting is so important to make sure that everybody's following the same checklist, et cetera.
Yeah, give them support, give them tools, give them a sample script for what they might share with each other. Have them create it, help them create it if you're a mediator. Give them a sample if you're an attorney. Give them a forum to have some success at communicating with each other and some structure and expectations. And I would say the same thing with the mother hates me comment. Don't assume either she does or she doesn't, but that's the way that mom's feeling, that the grandma hates her. So how might they be brought together with their common interest of this kiddo, that they really care about this child. So what might be ways that they could get united behind that?
There's another overarching theme here. How old are these parents? And how well do teens communicate and plan together, manage conflict and seek intervention, be consistent yet responsive with schedules? They're great kids, and yet it may be they're roughly 10 years before their prefrontal cortex totally matures in terms of adult decision making and judgment. So are they going to need some community resources to help them emerge as not only parents but young adults? Because they're great parents, but they're also knuckleheads developmentally at 16. No offense. So they're going to need some support in growing up as they grow as parents, eh?
So this tool isn't just about judging and declaring. It's about opportunities for improving the situation for the child. So we want you to continue to see it as that way. So next factor, Judith?
The practical things, the nitty-gritty, the capacity to provide the care a child, especially a young child, needs, such as in overnights. How about the transition between parents? Do they live 10 minutes away, or are they an hour apart? Are they able to be flexible and give the other parent first right of refusal? How are these working in this scenario? Do you see some of these things in scenario one? Present or absent, or unknown. Again, unknown is equally important. Unknown, and then what?
Yeah, there's not much in the scenario for that.
Right. We don't know, but it would be helpful.
Okay, the last one is a further factor, meaning, these are things that are nice if we can support them. So does the child have an existing relationship with a sibling, other close family member who can be a source of security, who can be present during parenting time? So it's describing who is this person, not just do they have other people that are important, but ones that are critical to thinking about when you create a parenting plan for that child. And are there cultural, religious practices that enrich the child's development, that are good sources of support for that child and community? Anything that we see for factors in this scenario that resonate? So those are the 8 factors in this checklist and how you might use it with a specific scenario. The next step was we're going to do another scenario, but in small groups. Before we do that, are there questions that people have looking at the tool? We didn't talk about pages 3 and 4 of the tool. They're just some further guidance that gives you samples. I don't have it in front of me, but other considerations, just a little bit more ideas about how you could create the parenting plan with different factors emerging as being important, particularly the red ones. We tried to make sure that those were, we gave you some support in addressing those. All right, if not questions, let's try it out again, and we'll have time for questions after the exercise. So going to scenario 2, which is Esther and Sylvia. Take a look at that. It looks like you're all at tables. Thank you for moving during the break. If you want to join another table, go ahead. If you can designate someone to speak for the group when it comes time to debrief, not that everybody won't have a chance to talk, but just someone that can speak for the table to start for giving the feedback. And we're going to, again, be looking at going through the checklist and specific feedback on the different factors. You can write on your copy. You can go online to the materials, the link that we've given you, and get another color copy if you want to just keep it clean. That's up to you. But I find it helpful to actually write on the tool. We'll give you, I think we decided 10 minutes to do your small group. No, we'll give you till, actually we're giving you, that's feedback too. Let's say 20 minutes. We'll start with 20 minutes and see if you get pretty far. If not, we'll give you a little bit more time.
So take a look at the scenario, please. Esther and Sylvia. Let's look at gateway factor first, that number one, the safety issues. What do you see? What jumps out at you?
Partner's drinking.
Right, what do you see?
At least the report that she can't sometimes function in the morning.
Right, comes home from work in the morning and winds down with several drinks. Definitely a problem. How would you tease that out? Again, as the judge says, people are accusing each other of all kinds of things. How could you get more information? I mean,
one of the things that I think when that kind of a situation arises is sometimes a parent might drink because the other parent is there and they know that the other parent is there. It might be something that they wouldn't do if they were the only parent responsible for the child, and so you need to determine whether that's this kind of situation or whether this parent is going to drink no matter what, and the extent to which they're drinking.
right, good point. In other words, the way it is now, is that the way it's going to be? And how do you know? Would you want to have that conversation? Are there other safety concerns that Sylvia has in terms of being able to care for a child? That goes to a different scenario, but I mean, if you're not there, if you really can't care for a child, either because you're not there or you're drinking, that could be a safety issue, right?
On the one has a new girlfriend that's not comfortable around children. And so that's also a concern.
Yeah. You've got a 3-year-old and an adult who doesn't like kids. I mean, that could be a formula for big problems, right?
Sounds like they both kind of have some anger issues. It says the parties argue intensely, accusations, tears, yelling, slam doors. So they both have some anger issues.
You bet. And as we know, those things terrify kids. Definitely something to deal with in terms of just emotional safety and physical safety. How about this next consideration? Gateway factor 2, child as a continuing established relationship with parents can be comforted and soothed by a parent and seeks that comfort. What do you see in here? And this child is supported by the parent, able to explore. What do you see in this scenario that suggests or not these factors?
It seems that the child has a continuing and established relationship with both parents based on the amount that they've divided up the day and that they're both taking quite a bit of responsibility, it seems. And even though it says that the child seeks comfort from one of them, it doesn't say that the child is uncomfortable with the other or wouldn't be fine with the other if that one parent wasn't there. So you might want a little bit more information, but it doesn't really alarm me that the child would seek comfort more often from one than the other.
So you might say that in consideration 2, a child is continuing an established relationship, seeks comfort from, I mean, it could be that it's present for both parents. And again, that's what's nice about this whole tool. I work with parents who haven't been part of a child's life for years maybe. And so we would say some of these things are absent, and now what do we do? On the other hand, I've got a colleague, she says, I have a 1- and 3-year-old. If my husband and I were to separate and I were to say, no overnights, you're out of here, she said that would be devastating to my kids because we're both actively involved. So this covers the basis for, I think, the whole continuum of families. Granted, for many of us in our work, we see the high conflict folks. We see the folks who maybe when the care has been very lopsided, maybe not, but I guess I'm saying this tool can really apply to the continuum of families that we see. How about consideration, stop when you've got a question or comment, I don't want to rush us. What about consideration 3, the parental capacity?
The tensions between them are rising.
I want a girlfriend.
alcohol issues. We need more information about that. We don't really have any information on mental health issues.
What about that issue of one of the moms coming home late to care for Jason, making the other parent late for work, and the concern that, well, what happens when we're living separately? Are you going to be able to be there for him? I think that goes to able to meet the child's needs, 3A, and good questions to ask. Again, I love this tool because it not only tells us what we know, but what we don't know, and gives us a guide, whether it's from the bench or in working with our clients, to say, what about this? To address the issues and help the client be aware that these are things that are going to need to, or definitely would be asked about and concerns raised in court. How do we be proactive with these issues, with these issues and address them to meet this kiddo's needs? I also like this tool because these things will make our clients, the parents, aware that these are the things our kids need from us as parents. When really maybe all they can see is, this is my time and not yours, or I want the kids and you go away. This is kind of a level playing field. These kiddos need these things from both of us. How about consideration 4? Medical or developmental needs, and are they supported by the parents? Do you see anything in this scenario that deals with that?
Well, this talks about having a consistent and yet responsive with schedules, and with the one has a very inconsistent work schedule, is required to work late and doesn't know ahead of time that that's going to happen, so doesn't have that.
Right. Are you looking at consideration 6?
Yes.
I think
sorry.
that's really important. I'm going to back up just for a second. Anything in number 4, because I think that's where the meat is in number 6. But in number 4, do you see anything that has to do with this child's medical condition? Any special needs? Seems to be. He's almost 3.
They sum it up, tension of between.
Yeah, I don't see anything there. How about 5? Any persistent maladjustment, excessive clinging? Yep. Okay. How about these things? Amy, you were saying.
That's why I guess I skipped. Sorry, I read ahead.
No, it's good.
Right. It brings out that Esther's work is often unpredictable, and she is required to work overtime without advance notice, and so her schedule's not really predictable.
Right. And that could be a problem. Managing the conflict, what do you think about that? Seems like they could use some support there, eh? Anger management or other ways to deal with it. Mind you, they're all living together, and that's got to be an incredibly stressful. That status is going to change one of these days, right? And then we've got a different ball game.
And it was interesting, though, it brought out that when Esther drinks is when Sylvia confronts her. So does that mean when she's not drinking that they don't have as much, when they're able to have a reasonable conversation and deal with things instead of waiting until she's, drinking.
Right. And how much of that that unhealthy dance is going to be played out when they split up? I mean, if I'm of a mind to provoke you, and I know you get really upset at my drinking, you come home and I've had a couple, then the dance begins. Hopefully that's not the same scenario that happens, but we don't know. Does each parent, based on this scenario, would you say in consideration 6, the D one, value the child's relationship with the other parent? Do you have some indication of that?
I think they're working together to make sure that they both have time with them. They're also letting each other spend their time when they're unable to.
That's something they have been able to do, right? To that extent, communicate and plan together. They've been able to do the tag team care for this child, as opposed to one of us is more important than the other, and that's kind of refreshing.
And I think on the shows too on the weekends because they continue the shared care schedule on the weekends when they didn't necessarily have to, that it shows that they can co-parent together.
You bet. And the recognition that each of us is important to this child and the time needs to be there. How about E, puts the child's needs before their own? To what extent do you see that or not?
The new relationship that the one mother is in, that she would enter into a relationship with someone who doesn't care for children, shows that maybe she's putting her own desires above what's good for the child.
It's a really good point. And what about that? Now what? And did you know that? I mean, are you just finding that out, that your partner really, in fact, doesn't like kids, or is this something that you've known for a while? I'm an actively involved parent. I want to continue to be actively involved with Jason, our son, and my partner doesn't like kids. That's a fork in the road, right? Definitely questions that I think any evaluator would want to ask about. Hopefully a skilled attorney is going to be wanting to get into that. The court, I imagine, would definitely have a question if the court has these facts. Now, there's no talk about transitions because, well, there is actually the transition, although they're living in the same home, looking at consideration 6F, ensure, can they have the capacity to ensure low stress during transitions? Well, right now that transition is sort of the changing of the guard, right? And that doesn't seem to be going so well, eh? So what could help, given the things that we've talked about in this consideration 6, these factors? What could help these parents? If you're in a position of making suggestions or recommendations, what would you want to offer these parents to help them get from not present to, or rather absent in some of these skills, to emerging and then present? Because that is the goal, right? Where are they now? How can we get them to the green light if they're at the red or the yellow? What would you suggest, recommend? Evaluator or judge or mediator or attorney?
So what do you think about the red zone, the gateway family?
I like doing the using the daycare as a transition, at least initially, to help reduce the chance of conflict there.
A lifesaver, right? Mm-hmm. Good idea. What else?
It's going to be a completely different ball game when they're not living together. And so the things that you might suggest now are it's time to separate this, and we get a parenting plan that's going to be the more long-term parenting plan, and get started on that now so that we can avoid, because a lot of the conflict or the problems are related to them living together.
As opposed to, like you said, I like what you're saying, Shannon, about moving forward to the life they're going to live. And that's not this one right now. Although financially, some people stay together for quite a while, right, before they split up. But I think that's a good question to ask. What's the timeline for the move, for the change that's going to be in place for this child's life for a foreseeable future? In mediation, do you think it would be helpful to take mom aside with a partner and have kind of a come to Jesus conversation with her about her relationship and the fact that this person doesn't like kids, and what are you going to do? And how could that impact Jason and your working relationship also, not only with your partner, but with your intimate partner, but with your co-parent? You think that's a better course of action to really have that conversation privately? Yeah. What else would you suggest as a way to support these parents in parenting this little one? How about with the managing conflicts and seeking intervention when needed? What would you suggest to them? Apart from moving apart. What do you think, Tim? Not to put you on the spot.
Ah, but you did.
Okay.
Okay.
Guilty. Resources in the community that might support them in managing conflicts more effectively than the slamming door?
Parenting class.
Yeah, I guess take a parenting class. You know, I guess
Something skill building?
yes. I think number one, everybody should have to do that, whether they are separating or not. But I guess I didn't see the conflict. More along the lines with Shannon. It's like I don't see the conflict as great as it could be. It's maybe presented as other people. I don't see it. It's early on and it may be continuing, but I think sometimes when you force a solution on some people, that there is a bad reaction.
Feeling like they're ordered to do something.
Right.
And feeling like somebody says thinks they need to be fixed.
Related to alcohol use. A lot of the conflict is related to alcohol use. And that could be something that one parent is blowing completely out of proportion, or it could be a real problem. And so, I'm reluctant to say, there needs to be an alcohol evaluation or something like that, because if this mom is coming home and having one drink twice a week or 3 times a week, that's maybe not something that, that needs to be, she needs to have an alcohol evaluation over. But if she's coming home several nights a week and drinking heavily, well, then maybe we need to have look deeper into that and have somebody looking into whether or not that needs to be addressed.
That's right. Which takes us back to that factor of consideration 3. Parent has no or well-managed chemical dependency or abuse issues. We don't know. Is it a problem? Is it a big problem? Is it a barrier to parenting? Right. So without more information, maybe not recommend that, but would you want to know more? Anything else?
I guess put child's needs before their own. The mother that neglects the child in the morning due to her alcohol use is a bit of a concern, because again, if she does it to the point where the other parent has to step in, she's definitely not thinking about what are the consequences of my own actions and how it affects the child.
Right. Well, yeah, and the fact that she works overtime and sometimes gets home early in the morning and then winds down with a couple of drinks. A rough way to start the day, huh? And I don't know if it's graveyard, but that would be a rough place to start. Do you think there would be value in as a mediator, perhaps, talking with the girlfriend? Sylvia's new relationship. Well, so Sylvia's in a new relationship, and her girlfriend's not comfortable around children. So, is this 2 months old or 6 months old? But how much of a factor, how much of a key player is this new relationship? Maybe that's the question to ask. What do you think?
There's no evidence that they're living together or anything at that point because they're still in the shared home. So there's no evidence that the girlfriend's moved into the home. But if it's going to be a long-term relationship where they're going to be living together, that could present a lot of problems for parenting time.
Right. Well, it says Sylvie's in a new relationship and her girlfriend's not comfortable around children. I would want to know who's saying that. Is that Sylvia or Esther? And how does she know? And what's that based on? The girlfriend may love kids. I don't know. So there's quite a bit that we don't know. And again, I think that's one of the values of the tool. It helps shed light on what's in the dark, if you will. What we don't know yet, but need to know.
Maybe Sylvia's girlfriend just thinks it's too early in their relationship to meet the child, to be introducing people in and out of the child's life. So maybe she's trying to protect the child, really, and which would be a good thing. And it comes off instead as if she doesn't want children, doesn't like them, and doesn't want to be around them.
That's a really good point. It could be exactly that, which puts things in a whole other light, eh? What comments? Well, actually, let's look at consideration 7. Parent can provide overnight care. What do we know and what don't we know from this particular scenario?
The work schedule can impact the ability to care for overnight.
Right. Right.
The parent that's there during the day doesn't possess the skills. It just says that due to work schedules, one takes the night shift and one takes the day. So what it doesn't say maybe says a little more.
Right. And it says Esther's work often unpredictable. How often? I mean, all the time? Is it every day? And when she has to work overtime and doesn't get home until early morning, what are they going to do? Is she going to have to call Sylvia at 5 a.m. and say, hey, I'm not going to be home till 8? And is Sylvia going to be able to accommodate? Do they need to build in some respite care, some child care, in case there is that gap?
Circumstance, though, where she might be doing that because she's able to, because she lives in the home with the co-parent, and she may take on overtime shifts because it's good for they have the extra money, the other parent is there, right? And she has a backup, and she may just choose not to when she doesn't have that backup.
But it appears that they have the capability because they already have a built-in child care section for that overlapping time, and so they have that tool already. They may just need to utilize it a little bit more.
Right. And as you said, take a closer look at their work schedules, the post-separation work schedules. How are y'all going to manage this and build in and take advantage of the resources that you have? Are there also family members who might be able to help? We don't know anything about the commute, right, between the parents, because right now there isn't one, but will that be a factor when they move out? Will they be living close together, farther apart? How about consideration 8? No sibling, right? No other close family member mentioned. In this particular situation, no cultural or religious practices. And yet, in some families, these will be big factors, right? Maybe even the big sticking points, huh? What comments, general comments, do you have about this tool and using it with families you work with? Is this something you think you'll be able to plug in, help plug your families into this framework in order to get a picture of what's known, what's unknown, what's needed?
I would say that it wouldn't necessarily apply to only children under 4. It's something that can be used in other cases as well, too.
Right. And of course, the attachment piece is the part that's really germane to the very young ones and the development. But you're right. You could apply it a family with a 12-year-old, with teenagers, grade school kids, because these can apply to all families, right? Questions you would want to ask. Other comments about utilizing the tool?
But I wouldn't want to pigeonhole a parent and label them too early. I think, the scenario and the earlier scenario, it's a first read. It's like you're meeting a client or somebody for the first time, and you wouldn't want to pigeonhole. You use it as maybe like a signpost markers to look at again later down the road, but I would be cautious to, again, just make a snap decision on most of these things, given the type of scenario that we have here.
Which are similar to some of the scenarios that families we meet where parents are slinging
So we're
mud
going
at
to
each
wrap
other.
up the small
It could
group
be-
part. Can you raise your hand if you feel like you're pretty far along in your group and ready to discuss it?
I think so. Yeah, it may also
See,
help you.
anyone
figure
who
out-
wants a little bit more time before we do the debrief? One group. Okay, let's give a couple more minutes.
Of what I'm hearing, that I can use this as a guide, this framework, what's hearsay? What's factual? What do I know based on fact? And what have I been told? How do I tease that out? This might also help in that. Because like you said, otherwise, it could be tempting to just make assumptions and start labeling people, and that's not going to be helpful to families. I think people are already doing that to each other, parents in high conflict, right? Well, thanks for your comments and discussion on this topic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have you share with the larger group what you thought about the scenario. So if we can turn your attention to the front now, and our recorders, Jane and Tracy. So the scenario was juicier, right? There was more to talk about. I could definitely tell that people were working through the factors and finding it interesting and challenging. So one thing that I don't know if we covered well enough in the large training is the first two factors, the gateway factors. Don't get too hung up on those in the beginning when you're going through this checklist. The question is the child immediately safe with each parent, and are the parents immediately safe with each other? Is this a situation where you feel like there can be time without limiting restrictions like supervision in the child's life? So that's kind of the primary screening. And of course, the answer might be, we don't know, we don't have enough information, we need to get more information. So in this scenario, do you see that gateway factor 1 or 2 is present for either parent? Is it present? Any thoughts about why it might not be? I see one in the very back there, Jane.
We thought it was emergent for two reasons. One was the drinking and the fighting on both sides, so we thought it was emergent for both.
Okay. And those are ones that we definitely need to address further down the checklist for this family. Thank you. Actually, does anyone want to volunteer for their table to actually talk globally about how they saw this case? Lisa?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk for our table globally about the case, although I actually do have a question about 2C that maybe I'll ask later. But we thought that the first two gateway factors, that Esther and Sylvia are pretty solid there, that they're safe with each other and with the child, although we're cognizant of the fact that they've been having a lot of conflict that's worsening recently. About parental capacities, child health and development, it appears that Esther, from what the scenario says, that Esther is the more able and responsive and warm parent. Sylvia is kind of a yes, but on 2A. Everyone has a question about Esther's alcohol use, whether that's really a problem, not a problem, with respect to her parenting.
Anybody have any ideas? Sorry to interrupt your particular group, but
sure.
any ideas about how to deal with that factor having been raised? Did you have some suggestions in your group?
Did we have suggestions in our group? I work as a mediator, so I mean, if these things come up in mediation, then I'm talking with people. If someone raises an issue, then we're looking at, well, what needs to happen in order for people to feel okay going forward, and evaluations or treatment of some kind, an agreement around that, or really looking at specific things that are happening in the home. Has it affected the child?
Mm-hmm. Other ideas that people had about the alcohol issue? Okay. I would ask more questions. I would say, it says sometimes it happens. How much is sometimes? Has she gone for a while without drinking? When she drinks, does Does it always end up that she's hard to wake up in the morning? How does she think this might play out when she's solo parenting? Would she choose to drink at all? Is she willing to say that she won't? And so, yeah, more questions. Okay, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Let's see. We thought that child health and development, that those factors were present. We didn't see any indication of any issue there. We didn't see any indication of an issue in number 5, Jason's behavioral adjustment. In fact, I was joking that they kept the child alive for 3 years, and there's nothing mentioned in the scenario about his having significant problems. So something right has been going on for a while. We started to have a desire for a lot more information when we got into numbers 6, 7, and 8. They have a history of having done planning and cooperation and communication as described in the scenario around work schedules and covering for one another. So they have some capacity there and some capacity around managing conflicts, but we were not clear whether they had the wherewithal to ask for help. And beyond that, we had a lot of questions and possibly emerging for Sylvia. Yeah. The parents did seem to value the child's relationship with one another, and there's some question about ability to put Jason's needs before their own, in that they were, one of our group, Cheryl mentioned, they decided to stay in the house together even though it is causing problems. And so that's a little bit iffy there. And it requires some imagination to see what might happen in the future when they are living apart. We don't know what's going to happen during transitions. That's a complete unknown there. So we didn't have a lot to say about 7 or 8. Although 7C, they have been doing that, asking one another to take care of Jason when the other was not able. That's basically our take.
Thank you. Other tables want to talk about how they saw the factor and what they might do with it, having identified an issue? Let's elaborate on the, what Lisa said, we don't know what will happen when they separate. Did you have some discussion about that and how you might structure a parenting plan to give opportunity to gather that information? I know some of you did. I heard it a little bit.
I think part of that is there is unknowns right now, because you don't know, like, the how far apart they're going to live and all those things. So at this point, you really can't make those decisions. You might talk about them, but you can't make them.
Yeah, so you don't know how the fighting will be after they separate. It seems like they went for a while without being that way. Then they were very highly conflicted. What will be the situation when they're separate? How can you help them structure a communication system that reduces the opportunity for conflict when they see each other? So you could talk about that, and then you could have a check-in. Depending on what capacity you're working. If you're a judge, you don't have as much ability to structure over time, but certainly a mediator, evaluator, attorney can help parents to try to factor in, let's have a trial period, let's see how it's going, let's see, have the conversation about the new partner and being realistic about the parenting time, and how do you structure that so that the parent, Sylvia, can really focus on her time with Jason when she has him, and ask those questions. Other thoughts from the tables? I know I heard some really good discussions there. Thank you.
Well, just briefly, we found this to be a pretty optimistic situation, and I come at it now from the perspective of a judge, but as a family law attorney for many, many years, I looked at it and said I'd have been happy to represent either one of these folks. everybody's got some conflict when they're separating. These folks have apparently managed to manage that conflict, and as you indicated, not kill the child in 3 years. But we found it real optimistic. There is a lot of information that you don't know, but this is the kind of scenario where the folks here that are mediators, I would suggest, would have some work to do on mediating a parenting plan that both agreed to. But in terms of addressing some of the concerns, number one, the issue of the alcohol, a clause, if Esther were willing, that simply said no alcohol use during parenting time with the child, at least at the beginning, until you'd establish that baseline. We had some questions about that, whether or not her alcohol use was really impairment, or was it the equivalent of coming home after work and having a couple of cocktails when you knew there was somebody else available to care for the child. We don't have any indication that she was ever impaired while she was caring for the child. Was she maybe relying on Sylvia too much? And maybe some of that's due to the conflict that's going on in the home. You just don't know that. And then the issue of the other girlfriend in the situation that doesn't like children or isn't comfortable around children, I think is what it says. There's not enough knowledge there, but that's the kind of thing I would expect to see a mediation address with, perhaps if these people are communicating as well as they appear to, because this seems like really good communication coming from my former practice as a divorce lawyer, where it can get way worse. That having something in there that says that we're going to develop a list of approved caretakers for who's going to be allowed to provide care for our children, and that for the time being, it's not going to include other people in relationships with either of us. And those were just some of the ideas we had. Was there?
So we need to work on making these more down and dirty, it sounds like, more challenging cases. On the alcohol piece, I do think that's worth asking the question. What would you do if you were solo parenting if the other parent isn't present? What's your plan, and how does it change? And again, even if you're an attorney, it's important to run through that with your client and be able to answer that question if it doesn't look like it would go to court, but if it did, how would you be ready to answer that question? Judith.
I think especially since this mom who's coming home after work is coming home in the morning and the boy's day is just beginning. So I think it's a good question to ask. What is your plan?
Anything else before we move on to the last scenario? And we're not going to do that in small group. We're just going to quickly give an example. Go ahead and read scenario 3.
Right.
Don't you wish you had a lot of these cases? I bet you do, Judge. You don't see these people, do you? This scenario illustrates the fact that the tool can work, again, for parents who are throwing rocks at each other and are really working well together and are struggling with an issue such as this one. How do we make this transition? How do we make overnight smooth and comfortable for this little one who's only been in one house with both parents? As you see in the commentary, it's not so much about the appropriateness of overnights with Robert and Katie and their son James, but how do we make that transition for this toddler to the shared care plan? How can we make it easy on him, huh? How many of you see cases like this? I mean, not the getting along part so much, but now we're transitioning, and how do we do overnights with parents who are connected, who don't have safety concerns, but they're kind of stumped with what do we do? So again, it illustrates the point that the whole continuum of families that we see or don't see, this tool can apply across the board. What questions, some general questions or comments do you have about this tool before we move to the judge and some closing remarks? Please.
I feel like I'm taking an inordinate amount of time.
Oh, go ahead.
But my question has to do with 2C. Child is supported in exploration by the parent. I know what that means. Is the parent allowing the child to play and to do what they need to be doing, but how do you
measure that?
Well, it seems, I guess. How do you measure that? And do parents know what we're talking about? I've been doing mediation for a long time, and people don't talk about the other parent doesn't allow the child to do stuff unless they get to be teenagers and they're talking about an overly strict parent. I just would like a little bit of more cowbell.
Thank you. Good question. Well, you may not know, and it may be the kind of thing that a custody evaluator going into the home would look for. I mean, in an extreme case where a parent says, well, all this parent does is keep this kiddo in the car seat and never lets a kid get out and explore and climb and, explore the world in this home. Otherwise, what do you think, Linda?
Well, one excellent resource to send parents to is this Birth Through 3 guide, which gets into a more user-friendly description of attachment. And there's particular sections, just looking at it briefly, page 7 has some information like that about why is that important, why are we looking for that. So I think that's a little bit more user-friendly, but I think it's the idea of understanding the child's developmental stage, and have they taken some classes, have they read some materials where they see how it's particularly challenging in 2 separate households to maintain that developmental support, and paying attention to that and being mindful of it. That's one thing I'd be looking for and talking to them about.
Andy might not know.
Yeah.
I think it can be broadly applied. I mean, I still hear, parents are saying, well, all they do if they have the child is turn on the video or the TV, or, even 3-year-olds are having iPads and so forth. Or am I hearing that there's a parent who has so much of their own anxiety that they're kind of helicoptering this child and they won't let them develop normal exploratory behaviors because it's like, keep them close, keep them close. It's not uncommon that we have children in evaluation where maybe a child has some sort of a medical condition, but the parent has taken it further than it needs to be. I'm just recalling as an example a mother who had extreme anxiety, and she made her child afraid to go outside because she kind of manifested for her as agoraphobia, where she didn't really want to leave the home. So she made the child fearful of going outside, of being on the bus, and for the child, she was only going to be able to do parenting time if she could be transported on the bus. So that might be a flag for me in that area.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, when I look at it too, is the idea that this taps into the parent's sense that the child has their own experience, and that the child can lead direction sometimes, and that they're being responsive to the child that they have in front of them. And that we know that children from infancy through age 4 to age 4, which is what we're talking about, they learn by interacting with the world. And so, diapering, feeding, all those things, that's not the whole picture. And the child will not get that full experience without interaction, and a sense that the child becomes an agent in engaging with the world with the parent's support, because the language development talks about this is what's happening in the world. The explaining to the child and the engaging with is that critical piece in supporting exploration.
Yeah, I just had some clients yesterday. The child's over 3, but when he visits his dad, they just watch TV and movies all the time and just cuddle. And the mother's really frustrated with that. So she's going to, we brainstormed ideas, and she agreed that it would be a good idea to email the father and ask that they start meeting at the parks now that the weather's better. And so that's what it takes, is recognition, and a small child has the same problem. So it's really important for parents to speak up and say this child needs to explore elsewhere other than in front of the TV.
Going back to this scenario where you really have both caregivers kind of equal, right? I mean, I didn't look at it really carefully, but I think the tough part is when you have two really healthy parents that are really supportive and they value each other as parents, and then, if the child's under 2, I guess the thought is really more than one overnight is probably not the best. I think that's what I'm kind of gathering. And I guess in the end, if because that's the hard part, is, well, who's going to be the primary, because it says here, may be stressed by being away from a primary attachment figure, but if you have a hard time really determining the primary attachment figure, am I the only one that has a hard time trying to, and that's the tough one. That's the really tough one. I guess then you just try to get the parents to agree that what's best for the child is for them then maybe to have a home base until they get to age 2. And then I love some of these ideas, where the one parent actually goes to the other parent's home and is there when they go down for a nap and wake up, and you kind of transition into that. But I mean, that's the tough one, is when you have to pick one when they're just a little baby and they're both just, there really isn't a preference, or they're both primary. I don't know, any thoughts?
Right. I like how you mentioned child development, Linda, and I'll give a plug for a great resource. It's by the American Academy of Pediatrics, Caring for Your Baby and Young Child, 0 to 5, everything from development to child passenger safety. It's a great resource to share with our parents, because things are always changing, the research is emerging, and it's just a great, great resource for all parents of kids under 5. So I think that can be a help.
The resource.
What's that?
The resource. What's the name of the resource?
It's called Caring for Your Baby and Young Child. It's a book by the American Academy of Pediatrics, 2014 edition.
On sale at Powell's. So just a couple of follow-ups. One is that in that situation that you were talking about, our scenario 3, pay attention to what's changing in the child's life and recognize that you want to slow down the change as you can, and maintain what the child's used to and familiar with, including the relationships. So the location may change. How can you make the environment more familiar? How can you continue what's been consistent for the child? So that's just a thought. On the resources for parents, if you see on page 4 at the bottom, all 3 of those are resources for parents, and I want to have someone from OJD give a plug for the Basic Parenting Plan Guide. Is now available in an interactive form. It went live in the end of February, which I wasn't aware of. Is there a specific site that we can give people to go to? Can you get over there, Jane?
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Vicki Tungate. I'm a former child support program employee, retired, but working temporarily through a federal grant that put together, based on a whole bunch of people. I know that's not a very technical term, bunch of people, but court staff, judges, mediators, domestic violence people, anyone that you can think of that touches parenting plans was involved in this interactive parenting plan. It's available and was put online through OJD. You can get to it the fastest way by going to the Oregon Child Support Program.gov and clicking on the little thing that says, there's a new resource. And if you click on that parenting plan, it will take you to the announcement about the parenting plan, and you need to click on the word online. And that'll take you right to where you can select the parenting plan. It will walk you through a variety of plans, 3 different safety plans, overnights, no overnights, supervised parenting time. It has distance plans, local plans, kids in school, kids not in school, daycare. It has all of the breaks built in. It has winter break, spring break, summer break, holidays, and a parent can do this, anybody can do this. You just go through, answer the questions, and at the end, it will prepare a parenting plan. You have an option at the end to say whether or not you want to sign it, so it can be turned into the child support program and qualifies as a written parenting time agreement for the purposes of child support calculations. Or you can just file it with court, or you can just keep it and have it as an agreement between the parents. But, and the help desk is available. There's a link on there that says, do you need help with this plan? And you will get to me, and it shows you my hours and all of that. I'm here through September when the federal funding ends. Probably won't be renewed, but I don't know that. So please, please feel free to use it. Feel free to send people to it. I think it's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. High conflict, it does not, but it basically incorporates what the basic and safety-focused parenting plan guides did. So there is some safety-focused parenting plan parts that will apply that. The last thing on parents, before I turn this over to the judge for wrap-up, is that we are mindful that this is not a user-friendly tool for parents. It's on our list of things that our committee wants to do. We have one more major training at the end of this month, and I think we're going to start on that next project, is how do we adapt these principles in a way that's more parent-friendly to do some support for them in deciding on plans for their young children.
So it's rare that I get to lift a microphone up to me instead of lowering it. Just a couple thoughts. The idea of all of this isn't for the judges here to encourage a particular result for parenting time. Rather, the idea is to give you a set of tools that will let you a little more objectively think about the information that comes to you in the courtroom, to give attorneys the opportunity to present information that we would then be looking to hear, and then just sort of improve the overall quality of information that we as judges and you as attorneys get to hear about parenting time. I feel like we're in the very, very beginning stages of understanding the distinction between parenting time as a litigation approach versus parenting time as a child-centered approach. Something Judge Easterday mentioned is something I struggle with too. In the last example, who's the primary parent? Part of that is, what's the non-primary parent going to think if they don't get a lot of parenting time? We really have to learn, and I think we're at a very beginning stage of this, changing the public perception that your value as a parent is not measured in the number of overnights you have, but in the investment that you make in ensuring that your child develops according to a very, very healthy way of living. And that's going to be very difficult. This is a start in that process. I mean, you guys are all here for a reason, because you kind of know what we're talking about and you're kind of interested in these tools. Educating the public about this, especially from the perspective of mediators and evaluators who, to be perfectly honest, if you're a mediator, you're going to know much, much, much more about a family dynamic than I'm ever going to know sitting on the bench in a litigation context and hearing parents talk about their parenting styles. So you're in a wonderful position to start educating the public as a whole that we really have to get away from the idea of parenting time is the thing that you can win or it's a measure of value as a parent, and move toward, let's figure out the best way that we can collaborate to take care of these children. So just this thought from what we presented. It's not supposed to be prescriptive, do exactly this every time, or don't do this when it comes to parenting time. It's supposed to be more of an approach that says every family is unique. Let's raise the bar of how cases are presented to us so that everyone has the same education about what matters. Lawyers present, judges get to hear, and mediators are coaching people on the things that we discussed today, which are the things that we all agree are important things. So does anybody have any questions or anything before we wrap up? Anything from the panel? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming out today. Oh,
Tracy's going to say,
Tracy?
about our committee, she's going to introduce the members.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, there's everybody, not just people that are here. Okay, and one more time with the link. This is where you got this link when you first, when you got the wrap-up email or the reminder email for this. If for some reason you're not accessing that or whatever, write down the link, because this has not only the tools we talked about today, but the 2 published articles by the AFCC, the link to the Birth Through 3 guide. There's a lot of good information at that website. So go there, explore the interactive parenting plan form now that it's up and running. Do good for kids. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Enjoy.